Welcome to the One Giant Podcast, a sportscaster featured podcast covering all things New York Football Giants. Live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning on Sportscaster, bringing balance to the analytics and emotions of covering Big Blue. Here are your hosts, Adam Armbrecht and Andy Makowicz.
And with that, friends, on a Monday morning, on arguably the 7th, 8th consecutive nice, sunny, cool, breezy kind of weather on the East Coast, man, this has been a dream scenario for me as we tiptoe our way towards spring. Joined as always by the healthy, wealthy, and wise Andy Makowicz.
I mean, we only live less than an hour away from each other. Adam, it's like 15 degrees outside. It is frigid cold right at the moment. So maybe just take a step outside, realize that it's not that 60 degrees we had. But nonetheless, it is sunny. I'll give you that.
Well, listen, the heat's on, the sunshine is coming in the window. So as far as I can tell, it's a beautiful day out. We'll find out though. I like it even when it is really chilly like this, as long as the sun is. I got a sunburn on Sunday sitting out of my dad's backyard. We sat outside, had a cup of coffee, and just kind of shot the breeze, as it were. And listen, my pale Irish skin, yes, I got a sunburn in 20 minutes in mid-afternoon in March.
Nothing like, the spring season turning over and you getting sunburned sitting in a patio chair when it's 45 degrees outside. So
could have been a windburn. We won't know for sure until we do the science. We come in on a Monday, and I mean, listen, we're getting towards now. Free agency is going to be getting kicked off here. We kind of left last week saying, here's all the information you need to know. Here's what could come down the pike next. And the immediate thing that comes up, of course, is Leonard Williams and what's going on with the contract. You actually, I don't know what it was, maybe on Saturday, shot me a text. Some new information has come to light. New S has come to light, man. It might not just be, right? What are we now thinking about here when we talk about the Leonard Williams contract, where they are in negotiations, and what Leonard Williams' expectations are?
So Giants Twitter is melting down as we speak. It's like collapsing into itself right now.
Daniel Jones style.
Yeah, exactly. This feels very Daniel Jones because there's nothing else really going on right now for the Giants. Look, Leonard Williams is a member of the New York Giants. He got given the franchise tag. He can play for the Giants for $19 million this year. The big challenge is everyone thought that a long-term deal would be done by now because both sides said, yes, we intend to get a long-term deal done. Some of the reports coming out over the weekend are saying, Leonard Williams might be shooting for the moon here and asking for $23 million per year on whatever long-term deal he does. I think it was Dan Duggan came out and said, if you set the over-under at $22.5 million per year, he would take the over on what he thinks Leonard Williams is going to be getting at the end of this whole thing. And because of all this, Giants Nation on Twitter and other social media is basically now saying, rescind the tag. I like him at 19. I hate him at 23. It's all over. And I feel like I'm living in bizarro land, Adam.
Well, because by the way, I had that, my gut reaction because immediately when you say the over, so I'm like, all right, fine. You're saying 25 million? We're talking about 25 million? How could you possibly? And then you take the brief pause and you say, remember, the long-term deal is supposed to be about breaking down that cap hit. So, whether or not you're talking about 20 million, 18 million, 23 million, whatever the number may be, it's not going to represent that. The worst case scenario, if you want to put it in quotes, is he plays under the tag and it represents that number. And there's no way to finagle that number in this upcoming season. So, I took a bit of a gut check there, but then I remember just a couple episodes ago, I said, he's one of the premier players at that position in the NFL. The Giants are in a position to have had and to continue to have that player on their team. So this is what the market dictates for players like these. This is where the contracts probably should be in the, let's just say, even a little bit wider, right? 20 to 25 million per year. Is it hard in a year like this with the cap, of course, coming down? Sure. But it doesn't change the fact that if you're Leonard Williams, you're probably not walking the door saying, I know that this is a down year, so let me adjust my expectations. I'm thinking about signing a 4-year contract with you. I want it to be representative of what the NFL is going to look like almost every other year when it comes to contracts. So a brief toe in the water of, man, is this going to be worth it? And then ultimately coming back to where I started most of this offseason, where I've stayed this entire offseason. Bring back Leonard Williams on a contract. There's really no limit to what you should want to pay him. And if it ends up being a number closer to 25 than 22 and a half, you find a way to spread that money out over the course of the contract.
So I think there's a big distinction that Giant fans need to think about in this whole negotiation, and you touched on it, and I think it's the answer. But if Leonard Williams gets $23 million, but his cap hit is $9 million, are you upset? Like, are you angry enough at the whatever the high dollar amount is that Leonard Williams is going to sign for? Like, is that you're like, there's no way he's worth $23 million. Like, whose money is that? It's not your money. It's not my money. Like, have someone else go pay that money. Like, what you actually care about is the cap hit because you want to sign other players.
I'm missing $23 million. I opened my wallet. It's not even there.
Right.
It's Kansas-style wallet. All my information is in there.
So when people are like, oh, $23 million, he's not worth it. It's like, it's not your money. And if we can get the cap hit down and be able to sign Dalvin Tomlinson, who cares what the number is? So I think Giant fan needs to take a step back and realize it's not your money. Whether it's 25, 21, 20, 19 million for Leonard Williams, what is important is what is his cap hit for the Giants so that we can go make the team better in other areas in free agency.
Yeah, and that's what I think it comes down to. So, and by the way, these things are in the public eye negotiations, right? So, I mean, all of these things are sending signals back and forth from both sides, right? We'd love to have him here on a long-term deal, but we do have him on a franchise tag, so he's going to play for us this upcoming season. Yes, I want to be with the New York Football Giants, but I am seeking a contract between 22 and 25 million, right? And whatever the numbers end up settling, this is a part of that process. And it's hard because if you take it at its word, then you could say anything here, right? The Giants don't want him. They want him. It's $30 million. It's $7. Who knows? But somewhere in the middle of all that, you have heard from both sides that they are comfortable wanting to, they want Leonard. We want Leonard Williams. He wants to be here. The devil's going to be in the details, but you would assume it's all still going that direction.
The reason for everyone's hysteria is free agency starts on Wednesday. Everyone knows that these free agents are going to be signing very quickly. A lot of the top guys will take their top dollar right out of the gate. If the Giants don't really have the cap space because they haven't figured out a deal with Leonard Williams, it hinders them in terms of going and getting some of the big fish that are sure to sign contracts within the first 3 to 5 days of free agency. So, if Leonard Williams' deal can't really get done, then guys like Kenny Golladay are going to be a pipe dream for the Giants. If the Giants can find a way to work something out with Leonard Williams, then there's an opportunity for one of those upper echelon guys on offense or defense to potentially be a possibility for the Giants.
Yeah, when you talk about a guy like Dalvin Tomlinson, right, that's when you throw it in there. Now, maybe the Giants can benefit with him of saying, you're going to go into free agency. If you get just talk to us. Let's stay in communication about it. You can do that with a guy that was on your team, right? You can have that relationship there and say, well, we're working on Leonard Williams, and maybe you're a part of the deal, if that's what the Giants intend to do. But a Golladay, he's not, hey, Kenny, if you don't mind, just give us a couple extra days. Give us till Friday. I know you're going to get a lot of money thrown at you, and we can't officially offer you anything, but, just wait and see. You're not going to get that type of grace period with free agents from other teams, right?
Yeah, and a side note on Dalvin Tomlinson. So obviously he's an important piece of the puzzle to this. Sports Illustrated just released an exclusive interview with Dalvin Tomlinson from about 15, 20 minutes ago. They asked him how free agency is, what's going on, what's the deal. And Dalvin Tomlinson said he loves his time in New York. He wants to be a Giant. He pictures himself being a Giant for life, but he also understands there is a business side of it. And with the Giants cap situation, he knows it's going to be tough for them to figure out how to make the money work. But he's basically saying, all things considered, I get why they're doing things the way that they are because of the cap hell that they're in. I would like to be a Giant if we could figure this out, which for Giant fans, even him saying that is encouraging, knowing that he owes us nothing. We didn't franchise tag him. We're just telling him niceties, but we're not actually backing it up with dollars and cents right now. So for him to be able to say, well, if they could figure this out, I want to stick around. That's a huge, tailwind for the Giants.
And by the way, the reason why it becomes interesting too, and now I'll expose my knowledge base here for a second, and you may have the answer on the tip of your tongue. Can the Giants still have time to apply the franchise tag to Dalvin Tomlinson if they complete the long-term contract with Leonard Williams?
No. So there's a
The wall
deadline.
over now, right?
There's a deadline in which you have to apply the franchise tag to one player. That deadline's already passed. So even if you rescind it, there's nothing that you could do. So Dalvin Tomlinson is a free agent. So the fact that he's even talking about the Giants the way that he is encouraging. And if Leonard Williams can get this deal done, then maybe we have an opportunity to get Dalvin, because he is going to be a hot commodity on the market, and he may sign just as quickly as someone like our old friend Kevin Zeitler just did.
As we get into him, I had remembered you mentioning Dalvin Tomlinson, and we had talked about that idea of getting the tag on him potentially, but that was something in the vein of, if we can get Leonard Williams on a long-term deal 2 weeks ago, then we can look to retain Dalvin Tomlinson on a 1-year franchise tag and worry about his contract going to next season. So pipe dream shot down. On the other side of it, though, as you mentioned, a guy that left the team is Kevin Zeitler. And so, we talked about it at the time. You said we're trying to restructure him. They're trying to, work with the deal and see what's possible. Ultimately, even though that was the storyline coming out, as we said, well, it takes both parties to want to do that. Kevin Zeitler didn't feel like I don't need to take a reduction in my cap hit. Maybe did my play drop off a little bit? Yes, you can make that argument. We also acknowledge that he was the most consistent, being a 31-year-old veteran on the offensive line this past season, but he ends up signing out on the free agency market. What are the details of where he landed? And quite frankly, landed quickly, right? He found a new home very quickly for all the guys that are falling onto the market from the offensive line. He found the new home almost immediately.
Well, Zeitler was very smart with how he went about this. He basically, I'm not going to put words into his mouth, but it was like, let's figure out if we could come to an agreement with the Giants as quickly as possible. If we can't, great. Let me hit the market before the market is saturated with all of these cap casualties. And so in that regard, it's interesting. He was able to land a deal with the Baltimore Ravens before anyone else was even hitting the market. So he got ahead of it, and was able to set his market. And Adam, we talked a little bit offline. If you had to guess how much money Zeitler is worth per year on the open market, what is that number? What type of contract would you expect him to receive from someone like the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we talked about it, we thought, you try to bring that cap hit down to closer to 10 million or something if you're the Giants on a restructure. But even when we said that, we did our research around the league saying, well, on the free kid, a player that caliber, maybe in the 6 to 8 million kind of range per year, but maybe it skews a little lower because of the offseason that it is and where the cap numbers are. He gets it done sooner. How many years was it? Give me the years.
It was a 3-year deal.
3-year deal. Let's go. Okay. So then what would that 3 years. Wow, I won't belabor this. I was almost gonna say 3 years, 24, but that number sounds high. Like 8 just sounds high. Let's go 3. Let's say 3 years, 20 million, and I won't even bother with the guarantees.
Split the baby right down the middle. It was 3 years, $22 million. The guarantees are what's interesting in this. $16 million guaranteed. Basically, what the Ravens did is they said, come play for us for about $7.5 million a year, and we'll guarantee the first 2 years of your contract. And he signed on the dotted line. That's how simple that deal was. And does that mean anything?
Showdown, by the way. I could have gone high and just been completely out of the prize.
You were still in it. You did not go over, so you're still eligible for the big prize at the end. What I found fascinating about this deal, Adam, is it kind of says that the Giants and him really had no intentions, at least one party had no intentions of trying to make something work, because the Giants could have gotten his cap hit down significantly if they reworked the deal. They could have extended him to a deal very similar to this. I think a couple of Giant beat reporters were saying, if the Giants were going to extend him and make it a 3-year deal, they were saying that the Giants would pay him $29 million over the 3 years just to be able to get us out of the cap situation that we're in. He gets released. He goes to a contender like the Baltimore Ravens, and he's making $7.5 million and getting $16 million guaranteed. It's surprising because the Giants would have had to overpay a little bit to keep their own guy. Instead, they parted ways.
Well, and that's what's fascinating about it. And we talk about the spectrum of what people are saying, right? Dave Gettleman's come out. We said it last episode, right? Kick the can down the road. You don't want to restructure deals, and you want to have that contract in your mind. And listen, but everybody does do that. That's a part of retaining this talent. But I think what this should indicate to you, and the questions we keep asking ourselves are, what is the confidence in the rest of this offensive line for the Giants? It's a youth movement. You're trying to rebuild it. I think that this has to be an indication that the Giants at least feel pretty good about all the pieces they have there. If not all of them, most of them, right? The Thomases, the Perts, the Gates, maybe even a Shane Lemieux. Who knows about a Will Hernandez at this point? But you feel pretty good about them because otherwise you might have said, you know what? Let's just do this thing. Let's overpay to keep this veteran on our team so that we don't feel like we're grasping at straws going into the year. Instead, you look across it, you feel pretty good about it, and you realize that value. Because by the way, because I know I said 6 to 8 million, but I think that number may be a little bit lower based on the rating of Zeitler's performance. So he probably got a little bit extra, and it would make sense from the Ravens, a team that is in a win now kind of mentality. So they're going to overpay a little bit. Don't let other teams get into the market with you and start to, dance and throw numbers out in front of Zeitler. So the world where the Giants would have overpaid on what could be a slight overpay on the market for Zeitler, it's probably for the best that they didn't do it. And this is also about, we want to be competitive. I know we want to win now. Just remember where we are, right? Like, this is a big picture thing. And if a year from now you had a 32 going to be 33-year-old Zeitler on your roster staring at this cap number, even if it wasn't the short term, I think Giants fans would be again looking at that and saying, boy, what are we doing here? How are we going to get this number off the books?
Yeah, let's not go too overboard with some of these like knee-jerk moves to be able to just like deal with the cap this year, knowing the cap's going to jump tremendously and the Giants are going to have tens of millions. The Giants are going to be one of the top 7 or 8 teams in terms of cap space next year, according to where all these different contracts lie, because they haven't paid Saquon Barkley, they haven't paid Daniel Jones, they haven't paid Evan Ingram, they haven't paid Jabril Peppers. So like there's guys that are coming up for contracts, but the Giants have tons of cap space. So if we can figure out a way to keep the nucleus whole here, and yes, the byproduct of that is going to be guys like Zeitler have to go explore free agency and we're going to have to release them. But next year we're going to have flush with cap space. We could look to sign another 30-year-old guard for $7 to $8 million and reset this whole thing over and over again. The key to this is do not, because of the shrunken cap, let a guy that could be here for 5 years and be part of the foundation of the success of the Giants when we start making playoff runs. Don't kick him to the side of the road just because we're trying to sneak a couple $1 million underneath the cap. It's these fringe guys that aren't going to be around long term, that might be a little older, that we could always go out and get in free agency when we have a little bit more money.
Yeah, no. That is the perfect tie back into Leonard Williams, right? Don't get scared about what the cap number represents this year and what that feels like, etc. This is a 25, 26-year-old cornerstone piece to your defense. This is a long-term player you want to retain, not a Kevin Zeitler who, again, a year from now, you could be saying, well, we drafted a guy in last year's draft. He's ready to replace him. We can move on from him. How are we going to move on from the money, etc.? So, no, I think that's a really important thing for Giants fans to remember, to don't overreact on these things. Again, don't have a moment like I did. And if you do it quietly to yourself or inside a private message with your co-host, and then clean it up before you get out there in front of the public eye. The other piece that we talk about here, though, is, of course, and this is an opportunity. We'll take a little victory lap before we do, though. I can't just let you have the stage. We have done a nice job, I think, this offseason of predicting where things are going to go. We still need to see ultimately how Leonard Williams shakes out, what happens with Dalvin Tomlinson. But as it stands right now, I think the cautious, kind of the logical steps to take, the reasonable steps to take, seem to be happening for the Giants thus far. And that's why you get to, as we say, Solder returns to the trenches for Big Blue. Nate Solder will be back on this team as of right now. The details haven't come out exactly what the new contract looks like, but they were able to restructure a deal with Solder to bring him back. Take the stage, sir.
Yeah, I mean, reading the tea leaves on everything that was going to happen this offseason, Solder coming back was a really interesting one, because every Giant fan immediately said, nope, he sat out. He stunk before that. Cut him. Get any money you can. Let's move on. Let's keep moving forward on this thing. But when you actually think about it, the Giants are desperate for tackle help. And you look at, they had Cam Fleming last year. They drafted Andrew Thomas. They drafted Matt Pert. They're trying to make things work. Solder opting out last year threw a huge wrench in all of the plans. Matt Pert was thrust into things. Andrew Thomas was thrust into being solidified as our left tackle from day one, for good or for bad. And now, Nate Solder's coming back. We knew that because of his cap hit, he wasn't going to be on this roster long-term unless he worked out an agreement with the Giants. And I think he kind of looked around the league, said, I don't know what my market is right now, but I also like it being in New York. I have a lot of other personal things outside of football that have gone on the last couple of years. Maybe some stability in the organization can be helpful. And so the reports are that Nate Solder is going to take a restructured contract, aka a nice little pay cut, in order to stay with the Giants. And the most important number is going to be what is Nate Solder's cap hit. And so because of all of the different math that's going on, Adam, the number to look out for Nate Solder during this restructure is $4 million salary, because $4 million salary would put his cap hit at about $10 million, which is the exact same cap hit he would have if we just outright cut him tomorrow. So you'd have to expect the Giants had that negotiation with Nate and said, look, we could either release you or we could get you down to this number. If you want to be a part of this, we do see you being in our plans, but we have to get the money down. So over-under is going to be about $4 million for Nate in terms of salary. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm fine with it in the short term. I think it makes sense, right? And this is the difference between Kevin Zeitler and Nate Solder. Kevin Zeitler had a market for himself, right? Kevin Zeitler had played last season. So the side note to this is, Nate Solder came out and said, I'm not in football shape. I didn't stay in football shape this past year away from the game. Like, just total honesty, right? Talked to Joe Judge at the press conference. He said, listen, I've had conversations with Nate. Hasn't been about football. It's been about his personal life. It's been about how things have been going, etc. That piece of it is important. And for whatever it's worth, I do like being a Giants fan for moments like these, where an organization is choosing to do something right by a player, but they really don't have to. They don't need to do this. The caveat is, though, this doesn't change the fact that come June 1, the Giants could still move on from Nate Solder. I think this is still the short-term answer of, hey, help us create cap flexibility right now in this moment. Try to get yourself back into shape. Get yourself into camp. Let's see how you look. And if you play reasonable backup swing tackle, and that's what I want to get into in a second here, but if you look reasonable at $4 million, yes, you're worth keeping around, right? What are we going to get? Another Cam Fleming on the open market? It's all relative. In the event that the draft goes a different way, that some other things unfold, there still could be a world where the Giants part ways with Nate Solder. But at $4 million, that's a great, as you say, veteran guy, locker room presence, a lot of young guys on the line. I'm perfectly comfortable with that going into the year. The question then becomes the role piece of it, right? And all indications are the most likely is swing tackle. That's the most likely scenario. He's the backup swing tackle behind Thomas and behind Pert. Doesn't mean you're handing Pert the starting job, but if you're a Giants fan, you want it to be that Pert gets the starting job and Solder is the backup. That's the most likely scenario. They've thrown out the idea of, could he end up in this? This is just media speculation. Could he start at right tackle ahead of Pert? Sure, it's on the table. I don't think that would be a good thing for the Giants overall. And then the last piece was, could he do something he's never done in his career? And that's play guard. I know that it's a less high profile spot on the line, so maybe feasibly he could get in there. And I think if you want to go, I'll go positive here. Having him on the roster and at a reasonable number just gives you the flexibility that, let's say, the draft doesn't unfold the way we hope, and we miss an early guard, an early offensive lineman that we want to go after, or something falls there at 11, whether it is Pitts, whether it's a wide receiver, whether it ends up being Parsons, right? Any number of things could happen early in the draft where you end up pushing back, getting an offensive lineman, and then maybe you have this little safety net. I'm not putting a lot of expectations on Nate Solder. Like that's bottom line. And I don't think Giants fans should be pleasantly surprised if he comes out and looks decent. I still think that, there's a world where this guy gets a lot of, DNPs on Sundays. That's where I think this is going. And I still think there's value of having him here. I know if you could see Andy, I think that he has a different take on what the plan is here going into the season.
I mean, this is such a win for the Giants if they can make this work out and he makes less than $4 million a year. Remember, Cam Fleming signed a 1-year, $3.5 million deal, right? Cam Fleming's upside or his best is nowhere near the upside that Nate
even
Solder.
At 33 years old, Nate Solder is a far better player to have at 4, or even I'll even say even at $5 million versus 3.1. I would rather have Solder on the roster than Cam Fleming.
Right. And so there are a lot of ifs on this one, Adam, and I can totally understand the reservations that you have. We haven't seen Nate play football in a year. We haven't seen Nate play good football in a couple of years, right? So like there's two caveats there, of course, but I do think, and this is to your point, there are a couple of areas where I think it would be interesting to explore with Nate. One is, I said it a couple weeks ago, there is a world where Nate Solder is our starting right tackle. Like I still, this all that's happened since we had that conversation continues to keep that as a possibility. Now we drafted Matt Pert, and obviously Giant fans would love to see one of our guys we drafted with a mid-round selection continue to develop and be that type of asset that we could build around long-term. But we also just need to make sure Daniel Jones doesn't get killed. And while Matt Pert did not play terrible, Nate Solder at his best is potentially better than Matt Pert right now. But we haven't seen that best from Nate Solder in years. So for me, I like the upside of this, knowing that it's only going to cost $4 million. It's not really changing the cap ramifications for us. We basically told Nate that was going to be the case. And to your point, we moved Nick Gates inside to play center. He had never played center before. That worked out pretty good. There is a world where, hey, look, Matt Pert looks great. He's continuing to advance. We just let Zeitler go. Can Nate kick inside and maybe provide us a little bit of swing position at guard? Could he be a really good guard on a $4 million deal? All of those things would be wins for the Giants. I think he can get healthy. I think he's going to get in football shape over the coming months. Now that the Giants have officially kind of told him that they're going to restructure this deal, now we just move forward saying, get in football shape, get that strength back, and let's figure out where across this line you could fit.
Yeah, and I mentioned him there before. Let's say, and Dave Gettleman said he came out, listen, I thought the offensive line finished, pretty strong at the end of the year. You can go down the line, basically everybody. I mean, very early in the year, we got confident in Nick Gates in that transition. He seemed to settle in nicely after a couple of maybe rough weeks. Thomas took a while, but the second half of his year was very strong. And by the way, I'll push back on any of these general talk radio afternoon in the New York area when they talk about Giants football and they say, well, you have Thomas, but look at how many pressures he gave up. If you're not going to go into the nuance of 80% of those were in the first half of the season versus the second half, then I really can't have a conversation with you about it. Thomas looked better. Pert, I think, it's a small sample size, right? And it's in and out. But the question becomes, there's two parts of it. If you think that, and I'm not even disputing it, but at his best, Nate Solder could be a better option at right tackle this year than Matt Pert. But if the margin is small enough, then you go with Matt Pert. Because you're talking about year two, you want this guy to develop. You want the future to be happening in front of you right now. The other piece, though, would be, and what I think you can start to see, whether it's clearing cap, confidence in Nate Solder, et cetera, or even through training camp, Will Hernandez, right? Will Hernandez, you can clear a couple million if you were to outright release him. He's still young. He lost his job essentially to a Shane Lemieux. So even if you're not bullish on Shane Lemieux, then what do you think about a guy like Will Hernandez? So the other piece outside of competing with Matt Pert, which maybe I would be less inclined to support, right? I would plug Nate Solder in to be the backup swing tackle and I'd keep him for the year. No questions asked. I'm fine with it. If you tell me that he's competing for the starting right tackle job, I'm a little bit wary of that because I'd rather Pert be having that shot. But if you tell me that he's coming in to compete for a guard position, and essentially you want to say Solder, Hernandez, Lemieux, and then we'll see what happens in the draft. But pre-draft, the intention is here's 3 guys, 1 veteran changing positions. If he wins the starting right guard job, so be it, because I'm not pot committed on Will Hernandez. And even to a lesser extent, I'm not pot committed on Shane Lemieux. I don't think the Giants were dying to have him get reps last year, right? I think Will Hernandez forced their hand into giving, Shane Lemieux reps. And he looked way better than maybe you'd expect a 5th round pick to look but I would understand him needing another half a year to season himself. So be very interesting to see how that plays out. That's where I think Solder can make real headway if he wants to be a contributor on this line.
Well, the other key piece of this puzzle is that the Giants don't have cap space. So we can't go out and sign free agent swing tackles right now in free agency because we don't have the money to do it. So like locking in someone like Nate Solder to a smaller deal to at worst be a backup swing offensive lineman is a great move for the Giants because we don't have the flexibility to go out on the market and go pick up a guy when we don't have this limited cap space. So, Nate Solder's cap hit is post June 1. We can bring that cap hit down further. That is after free agency. That's after the draft. So having him on this roster, at least if the bottom falls out and we swing and a miss and we get nothing in free agency and we get nothing in the draft, at least you have that security blanket to say we have a veteran, could be great in the locker room, can be that swing tackle, can put him in a pinch. And at the very least, that's something to build upon and at least allows you to say, okay, now we can address the draft in certain ways. We could go after a guard or a backup tackle and build our team from there. But keeping him is huge because the cap number being as low as it is, if he can restructure this and get down to under $4 million, it's a huge win for the Giants and it resets, things for Giant fans with Nate Solder, I think.
Yeah, no. And by the way, he can end up going out. How about that? Well, let's close out on that idea. Nate Solder could go from being the highest paid starting left tackle, the biggest contract ever given out, to a free agent left tackle, then covering the spectrum of the disappointment that has been his Giants career. And he could end up closing out the last 2 years of his career as a veteran, backup offensive lineman, locker room presence, great leader, all the intangibles that we know Joe Judge really loves. And he could somehow end up morphing value right out of that, out of what really at least until this point as well, right? Like everyone's just saying, God, what a disaster. One of the worst ones. You're never going to clean up the money that you spent on him at the time and the initial return on investment. But if he ends up giving you 2 years as a veteran backup swing tackle, I'll end up saying, man, listen, it worked out, whatever. He ended up being valuable to the team, right? And it's never going to change. We talk about this with past contracts, right? You say about JPP is the great example, right? Well, the Giant at the time, everyone said, no, it makes sense. You got to move off of him, right? Listen, the guy doesn't really, the stats aren't quite there anymore. It's a big number. You're not going to do it. You trade him. Then he has some really big years and wins another Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. And everyone goes, remember when you could have just brought him back? Well, no, it's chicken or the egg here. But I really do like the idea on a personal level. I like the idea of Nate Solder being a guy that gets to reclaim his reputation with the Giants.
A simple answer. We'll bring it back to what we said about Leonard Williams. 1, the money spent on Nate Solder is not your money. Check your bank account, check your routing numbers. No one took any money from you for Nate Solder. So who cares what he gets? 2, you may have a bad taste in your mouth about the money that was spent before, but if he renegotiates, look at it forward thinking. If Nate Solder's going to sign a 2-year, $4 million per year deal, like if you think that's how it's going to go in your head, of course you'd sign up for a swing tackle for $4 million over 2 years. Like that's a no-brainer for Giant fans. So I know that it's frustrating because he was supposed to be the left tackle of the future. Guess what? We've made changes to those plans. Andrew Thomas is our left tackle of the future. If Nate can provide value, he may be able to ride off in the sunset in a completely different role for the Giants, and Giant fans won't have this sour taste in their mouth thinking that he was going to be the future left tackle. Maybe if he's just a contributor to a potential playoff team in the Giants, then we'd be very happy with what happened with Nate Solder.
I love it. We'll circle up on the back end here. We may have to come in on Wednesday with the start of free agency, highlight some of the bargain shopping the Giants may want to do because that's where they need to live if they're going to bring in any additional talent. You can follow us on social media at One Giant Podcast. You can download, rate, give a 5-star review to the podcast if you don't mind. And until next time, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand that you know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
So close.